Today's guest on Around the Coin is Michael Kong, the CEO of Fantom Foundation. Michael, prior to Fantom, was an advisor to the project. And it's an absolutely crazy story about how he went through the process of being an outside advisor to an audit of the company, to discovering fraud, to then taking over the organization, to turning it into the success that it is today. So talk about crypto drama. This is some of the best content I've heard. Michael is an incredibly authentic and intelligent speaker. The organization Fantom Foundation has raised $40 million. At its peak, the Fantom crypto coin had a market cap of 8 billion. Today, as of recording, it's roughly 1 billion. We talked about what Fantom is, what they're trying to accomplish in the world, and what some of the interesting challenges that they've observed in the crypto space is. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here is Michael Kong. All right, Michael. We're live. Thanks for hopping on today. You are running an awesome project, foundation, company, protocol, whatever you want to call it. The foundation itself, I'd love to talk about just the structure. Let's lay things out on the table first. So you have the foundation, the token. How do you think about the pieces on the table? Like what are you currently working with when it comes to Fantom?
So first of all, thank you very much, Michael, and the rest of the crew at Around the Coin for doing this interview with me. Really appreciate it. So in terms of like the structure, I mean, we've got the foundation, and we've got like the foundation. We've got the Fantom ecosystem, right? So it's kind of like how there's like the Ethereum Foundation and there's the Ethereum ecosystem, right? And there are a lot of like different players on like both sides, right? So that's kind of like the way I like to think about it. So the objective of like the Fantom Foundation, is to like grow and develop the Fantom ecosystem, right? And that really comes down to two things. One of them is, and the most important objective for us, is to work on the underlying technology. So we're the ones that originally built up, this consensus engine that we have, combined with the Ethereum virtual machine to give you that smart contract functionality. And, that took us like 1.5 years to get up and running, approximately, or a bit longer, into production, right? And we're continuing to make improvements to it. And we just had like a major release just today, actually, to make synchronization nodes more efficient, right? So that's our primary objective, to keep improving and iterating on the consensus, keep improving, like, for example, like the smart contract execution stack, so you can execute smart contracts more faster. And it's all about like achieving, faster transactions, cheaper transactions, more secure transactions. So that's the first aim. And the second aim more generally is more of like, in terms of like business marketing and PR. And that is, promoting the chain, telling people why they should build a Fantom, getting more developers in, getting more users, and really helping them. So providing them with like a whole bunch of like infrastructure services, not just like the underlying chain technology, but other like services like APIs and servers, etc., as well as, connecting them with other projects in the ecosystem, maybe doing some financial support, marketing support, integration support, to really help grow the ecosystem, because that's what it all really comes down to. So that's what the foundation does. And the Fantom ecosystem is like a collection of like individuals and entities that really just like came to Fantom. And I think like the interesting thing about Fantom is that like the vast majority of the growth that we have on chain has been organic. And so, it's been like DeFi projects that began on Fantom, and they were like high quality, and that helped attract more users, which help attract more developers. And so this community is very much independent from the foundation. Sometimes we have some disagreements within people in the in the ecosystem. Sometimes we have a lot of agreement, but on the whole, we're really building for them, and that is who like the ecosystem is. There's all those users and all those people doing the daily transactions. Hundreds of thousands of daily transactions on a daily basis. So that's really like the groundwork. That's Fantom in a nutshell.
Got it. And the way generally companies will start in this approach would be you raise money from a private institutional investor, you start a typical LLC or C Corp if you're in the US, you use that money and that team to build out the token, and then you issue the token publicly with the ICO or airdrops, direct listing. and then you really emphasize the team is the sole goal of the funded company is to dissolve the company and just have the value be in the token as it moves to decentralization. Is that the general structure that Fantom has taken, or is there something, or is there another twist to it? I'm always curious about the early funding economics and tokenomics because they're structurally so unique compared to typical startup venture.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's one of the many unique things about like crypto, right? So like Fantom did its ICO back in 2017, 2018. And yeah, it was one of the biggest ICOs of like the tail end of the ICO boom, as I like to call it. So this was like February, March 2018 was when it started. We finished the ICO in June 2018, and it ended up being massively oversubscribed. And so the amount of money that it ended up raising was just a bit under $41 million, I believe, right? So the funds went into the Fantom Foundation, used to build and promote like the Fantom technology as described before. And a lot of the funding was used to basically like develop the initial platform. So we hired like a bunch of developers to build out, this asynchronous technology that we have. That was like always like the original vision, to be like faster and cheaper and more efficient than say like Ethereum. So that's what the funds were used for at the time. And since then, we've actually managed to grow the funds much more substantially via, a lot of it has to do with like DeFi yield farming, in particular through the efforts of Andre Cronje. He was actually with Fantom from the beginning, so he helped get Fantom in to like yield farming from the very early days of like early 2020 to basically to the present day. And so we've been able to grow those reserves a lot. And the reserves belong to the foundation, but they're used to like grow the chain. So for example, we've used them for an incentive program. We've used them obviously to build the underlying development. We've used them to like hire people to promote the chain, so things like business development, marketing, PR, and are paid for like infrastructure providers to launch on chain to integrate with Fantom for the benefit of the developers. So that's like the structure at the moment. It's really, as I mentioned before, you've got the Fantom Foundation and you got the Fantom Ecosystem, and the Fantom Foundation is tasked with helping to grow the Fantom Ecosystem.
All right, well, that was a great answer. Can you define yield farming for me?
So yield farming is essentially when you put some money that you have, right? So for example, it could be stable coins, and stable coins are these like these cryptocurrencies that are supposed to be pegged 1-to-1 with the US dollar, right? So for example, and there's many different kinds of stable coins, right? And I won't get into all of the models because it's a bit long. But for example, you can have a centralized stable coin, for example, like USDC, and this stands for US Dollar Circle, and it's issued by this public company listed in the US called Circle. And so they issued this cryptocurrency called USDC, and they keep $1 of US dollars in reserve that you can theoretically go to them and redeem your one USDC for $1 US, right? And then with that $1 US USDC, you can put that money into like various different protocols on decentralized finance. And these protocols can be, typically you're adding like liquidity to a liquidity pool. So it's like in the form of an exchange. So for example, like when you go to one of these decentralized exchanges and you want to swap one token for another, you have to like, you need to interact with liquidity that's already there, right? Because there always needs to be another person on the other trade. It's kind of like how it is like makers and takers on traditional exchanges, right? So when you contribute as a maker, or when you add liquidity to these protocols, you get rewarded in a couple of ways through these protocols. One is that you get awarded via the transaction fees on the network, and another way that you get rewarded is via a new token that's minted, which is usually like a token that kind of like that allows you to kind of like control the protocol, right? So that's how you distribute like control of the protocol, rather than it being centralized in a particular like company. You can actually distribute tokens, and they form essentially what's known as a DAO, decentralized autonomous organization. And it's basically a collection of individuals that interact with a smart contract that kind of set the rules for the protocol. And so, you get rewarding in trading fees, you get rewarded in this token, the token has value, it's traded. That's essentially what yield farming is.
Good Good
And
definition.
not,
I like that.
I'm not
So
throwing a
occasionally,
lot
I
of
like
like
to.
different terms in there, so I
No,
can kind of break them down a bit. Yeah, it's a little
no,
bit like weird and
yeah, yeah,
complicated
no,
if you're not really into it. Yeah.
yeah. No, I sometimes I even like to ask the definitions of simple words because sometimes I feel that people define words slightly differently. You know, even what security means, or yeah, different words like that. So you raised 40 million, you built out the foundation. How do you think about the productization today? So when you look at Fantom, briefly, do you think of this as a company or a project that will launch different projects at a time? Yeah, am I describing that correctly? So you could have,
like,
all different sorts of things.
yeah, so like, it is very true that like, that there might be a lot of developers in the Fantom ecosystem that are developing like a whole bunch of different things, right? And we've kind of seen that. First it began with last year or the year before, just with some like dexes and like, these protocols where you can swap one token for another. But now it's really branched out to many different sort of technologies, right? We've got like lending and borrowing protocols. You've got all these sorts of like sophisticated like cover calls, like options and derivatives and puts, and a lot of different like decentralized finance projects that you see on Ethereum, you kind of see on Fantom as well, right? And even with the existing projects like Spirit Swap and Spooky Swap, these first two dexes that launched on Fantom and help grow the Fantom ecosystem, they too are launching like new versions of the technology to make it better and more efficient. And so you're definitely seeing like a lot of more products being built out in the Fantom ecosystem. But just to make it clear to your audience, though, so I work for the Fantom Foundation, and the Fantom Foundation isn't really in the business of developing these new applications. What it is in the business of doing is helping people develop these new applications, but not to do it ourselves. Because I think it's a very important principle that we don't use our own development and resources to build applications on the network to basically compete against people, because then it has a chilling effect, then it reduces innovation, and we're not really achieving our aim of growing and developing the Fantom ecosystem, right? So what our aim is as a foundation in terms of technology is to focus not on the application layer, but focus on what's below it. So focus on building, more efficient technology, faster consensus, faster synchronization between nodes to make it much more efficient for people to execute transactions through their applications on top of the network. So that's like our objective. But in the community, you've seen like a whole bunch of innovation, and not just like in DeFi, but in NFTs. Like I've seen like more like games being developed, and I have like AMAs with like a few games, this week, and also like in subsequent weeks. There's metaverses being deployed. There's your usual like different collections. I think we have over 1,000 collections of NFTs on Fantom, and now that is like relatively small compared to like other layer ones out there. But it is all just like organically driven. The foundation has never gone out there and told people, you must build this, you must build that. It's more like people come up with ideas and we help them build it. And I think that's a very important message that I want to say to your audience out there, and especially developers who might be considering building on Fantom.
Yeah. And I think I was interviewing the guys from Near Protocol, and I think that's a playbook that is emulated repetitively because it makes sense. It's like you have the piggy bank and you have the dozens or so people who are really focused on growing the value of the token. I'm curious on the tokenomics. So when the ICO happened, in hindsight, was there anything that you think should have been done differently? Or if you were to relaunch today, you would do differently in terms of how tokens were distributed or vested or that kind of thing? What did you learn?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to go back, a bit about the history of Fantom. Fantom wasn't originally a project that I started. It wasn't a project that has any of the original team members, or almost like none of the team members we have now were part of the original team. It used to be a Korean project, and it used to be with these like so-called people who had PhDs and associate professors. They were talking about developing like a new technology, right? And it turns out that technology wasn't real in the end, and will kind of forward. And so how I got involved with Fantom was that I was an advisor to them because I was working for a fund in Australia that helped them launch an ICO. So we helped them with the structuring, we helped them we're setting up the ICO smart contract on Ethereum because they didn't have a chain built or anything close to it. Actually, we found out later. And also, the legal setup and just like general like advice about, fundraising and ICOs in general and some technology stuff. So, there were like certain things with the token economics that I didn't like. So just to give you an example, I think the original team wanted to raise $60 million, right? And I said that was too much. Raise closer to like 20 or 30 because that's more like the market norm, and it'll be easier to like close the raise. You don't be seen as too greedy, and we end up compromising 40. So I'd rather have like raised lower amount, which means that there would have been fewer tokens given out, in the initial raise, which means that we would have had a much longer runway, like to this very day. So that is like one big disagreement I had with them. But I wasn't running the project at the time. I was advising them, and we had to give them advice, and we kind of had to compromise with them. So that's definitely like something I would have changed from the beginning. There are other like little like details that I would have changed like here and there, but I can't really do anything about that now because that was like 4 years ago. But like in retrospect, I mean, obviously there were like different things I would have said. There's maybe different actions or different like methods of persuasion that I would have like said, or like words I would have used. But that's in the past now.
How about more of the vesting schedule or the distribution of the shares? I've asked people this, and I usually get a pretty interesting response that people either structure their vesting of the founding team differently or investors. I know this is probably not something you think a lot about since you don't have to do it.
So this was like another like disagreement I had with the team. So I wanted like the vesting to be longer and like the cliff to start longer, just so like people would be like stick around with Fantom a bit more before they started getting tokens. But the original team was, let's just say, like a little bit greedy and weren't really interested in launching like a long-term protocol, which is why the technology wasn't true in the end. So they ended up like I remember on the former CEO would get like tokens every month and just like dump them on the market, and he would ask someone within Fantom create him to do it. And I know that to be the case because I saw it myself with my own eyes, and I talked to the Korean team about it because I used to spend quite a bit of time like in Korea in the Korean office. So I saw a lot of the stuff that they were up to firsthand, right? So, clearly the reason why, they didn't want like longer vesting was because, they weren't really in it for the long term. So that was definitely another disagreement. I can't change that. But like, that's kind of like how it played out. Yeah.
And in hindsight, this, did you say fraud earlier? That you think it was not just a lack of desire to build it? It was.
We were lied to. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just say that point blank because I have irrefutable proof and emails to show it. So, for example, they produced this technical paper in July 2018, right? And it reported to say that, well, this is like what we've been working on. Our original technology, ABFT, faster, better, cheaper, etc. Right? And so I remember Andre and I took a look at it, right? And it looked pretty good. But then I sent it to a friend in Sydney who was a bit suspicious, right? So this was a friend that was quite experienced in distributed computing, and so he read through the paper and he was quite suspicious about the contents of it, right? So he ended up running the software through this plagiarism software called Turnitin. It's like what all the like universities in Australia use. And it turned out that equations were taken from the Hashgraph Scores paper of 2017 or 2016, right? And so you'll go through the paper, and we had this kind of joke in like so I studied like finance and IT, right? We had this joke kind of in IT that kind of like the dumb people are the ones who are like, oh, I'm just going to like steal someone's algorithm, right? But I'll be a bit clever, right? I'll rename the variables, right? So I'll change like A to Y, B to X, C to Z, and it's completely different, right? Ta-da! I was like so smart, right? And so that's exactly what these guys did. They just like renamed the variables, but the actual equations themselves were the same, so it's equivalent, right? And then once we pointed that out to them and we showed them the irrefutable proof, that's when they kind of admitted, and they wrote back to us an email and said, I'm sorry. Yeah, we took shortcuts. We were under so much pressure. I think what happened is that had hired these 2 postdoc students that he knew and taught at Yonsei University, right? This is just my hypothesis. And I think they were not qualified to actually like work on this stuff. But because An was desperate to do the ICO, he pressured them. It's my belief. He pressured them to do it. Understanding, the culture in Korea and having heard of people in the academic system in Korea, I believe that they were pressured. And so, I'm not excusing them, right? But I'm just trying to give you the context of what I think happened. And so they thought, okay, we need to produce something. We're just going to take something that we believe works and then present it as ourselves, right? And so this is like the deception part, right? And so, we had to like rebuild the whole team. Andre and I had to rebuild the team. And I remember learning about this. I was in the supermarket in July 2018 when I had heard that my friend had discovered that it was plagiarized, and my heart just sank. I was like so disappointed, and that disappointment like quickly turned to anger, right? And so at that time I was prepared to quit, but like Andre convinced me. He said, no, let's try and work something out. Raise about a bunch of money. We can use that funding, to try and work on some new ideas about achieving the original vision. And I have a background in distributed computing, so let's work it out, right? Because my background wasn't really in distributed computing; it was more like virtual machine stuff, like smart contract type of work. And so he and I kind of had to build like a new technology team, some of whom are still with us to this very day. And so they were the ones that actually managed to build like a unique consensus algorithm. This ABFT. Sorry, what I mean by ABFT is being able to process transactions simultaneously, right? So instead of processing one block at a time, you have the network processing multiple, maybe 5, 6, 7 at the same time. So you get more transaction throughput. So the new developers we brought on board actually managed to achieve the original vision. And that's the technology that we have today. It's unique, it works well, it's open source, it's permissionless, anyone can join and leave the network, and it basically never goes offline, right? Like it hasn't been offline for a single millisecond for the past year. So that is essentially what happened, to put it like quite bluntly. I mean, there's a lot more detail to it, but I won't take up the next 72 hours of your life going through each and every interaction that I had in the past, and it was also like 2018, so it was about 4 years ago or 3-4 years ago.
I mean, back then that was like
it's a lot better.
That was like the average. People were doing that left and right. I mean, that was probably like the default. I feel like back then.
Yeah, exactly. So like when I went through this whole process, I thought, wow, it's so bad at Fantom, really. And then I heard stories from other projects, and I was like, wow, actually, in comparison to them. Like objectively, like Fantom was like the whole experience was terrible, but in comparison to other projects that launched around the same time, it actually was like the average. It's kind of sad to say, but it was actually the average. And so, I felt like, I was a bit surprised, but then I kind of like learned. I was like, okay, so this kind of behavior is like, has gone on a lot. It kind of makes sense because, when there's fast money, people just want to like put out something there, raise a bunch of money, and then figure out what to do later, right? And I think that's exactly what the original team did. I learned a lot, and I was very optimistic about people in the past. Now I'm a bit more cynical, and that's one of the lessons I learned. Like, don't be trusting of people until they earn your trust, right, by their actions. So if they have trustworthy actions, then you can trust them. If you just meet them for the first time, don't just automatically assume that they're good people with good intentions and they tell you the truth. Just be kind of like neutral. That's like a big lesson that I learned.
Yeah, that's so true. At least they were not overtly maleficent. I mean, they didn't go out there saying that they have bad intentions, right? It was like, hey, if that be true, right?
Actually,
they weren't a fraud.
Actually, there was a director. There was a director at Fantom that was going around stealing people's money. And I later found out was running 2 books for the ICO, right? So one book was, the one that I was aware of where like, people actually got token allocation in the end. And there was another book where he promised people money. He promised people tokens. He got the money in and he kept it for himself. So that was malicious intent, absolutely malicious intent. Not, just to be clear, not by every single person in the Korean office, not by every single person that was involved in Fantom from the early days, but by a few of them, including the leadership. Because I'm talking about like a director here. So,
Yeah.
and the leadership is toxic at the top, and corrupt. It seeks down to the rest of the people. And so I remember talking to people in the Korean office who were like normal people. They weren't bad people. And I remember one person saying to me, "Oh, why should I care about Fantom when my boss doesn't care?"
That's so rough.
Because I said, why aren't you doing anything in the office? And he said, because my boss doesn't care. So why would I care about what I do?
Yeah.
If nobody cares about Fantom.
Yeah.
We're all going to quit anyway. I mean, my boss is going to quit.
Well, I have to ask you this.
That's what I heard. This is terrible. But again, I want to emphasize this is like 2018, so it's very different now. I stuck through it the whole way through. A lot of it has to do with Andre convincing me to stay. I really have to say, and now the team is a lot better. It's reformed. Obviously we still have disagreements from time to time, but none of this behavior goes on anymore. It's a lot more. It's a lot more efficient, and it's a lot better. It's a lot better environment.
One thing I want to ask you, because it's such a fascinating, juicy story. So you're not even in the same country. You're just an advisor to this project at the time. How did you acquire the assets? I mean, what right do you have that you went in and said, "Hey, we're going to own the domain. We're going to own the." I mean, what are the assets, and how did the government get involved and say, we're going to kick these guys out and give you access?
Because of the way that we served the original company, the people in Korea appointed someone from our side as it's a bit technical, but appointed someone outside as what's known as the founder for one of these Cayman Islands foundation companies, right? And then they consented to appointing me as a director. And so, on the directorship, it changed a little bit. But basically, in early 2019, it was myself, and it was the chairman of the company, he's still the chairman, called David Richardson, and it was myself. It was myself, David Richardson, and it was the former CEO, Dr. Ahn, right? And so, as directors of the company, people would appoint and remove CEOs, right? And I had known about other activities he had been up to, right? Let's just say misappropriation of funds and other bad activities. And so, we wrote a letter to him and said, because you've not told us the truth consistently, because you have not answered our questions about where funds have gone, because you admitted to taking funds and spending them on areas that were not authorized, including on yourself. We're going to remove you as CEO. And the way that I see it and the way that David sees it is that we didn't have a choice. This wasn't a question about feelings. This was a question about our fiduciary responsibility. Because as a director, you have a fiduciary responsibility, not to have your funds misappropriated. And so if you know that someone is misappropriating the funds, and you allow that to happen on your watch, you can potentially get into a lot of trouble as a director, right? Yeah, exactly. You can be. And so we had to take action, and that's what happened. And obviously we consulted lawyers and thought this through about the best way. But this was absolutely the right decision. People ask me, "Oh, what's the best decision you ever made at Fantom?" And I always say this was the best decision, because had I resigned and let the Korean team keep running it, Fantom would have died, because the guy didn't care about the project. I mean, he got Fantom this big expensive office space in Korea, in this building. His office was a few levels above, if I remember correctly, and because he was running his own company called Shikshin, this food technology company, and he had an office in Shikshin, but he didn't have an office in the Fantom office. And people in the Korean office were telling me, "Oh, he never comes down. He's always upstairs." So how can he be a CEO of this company where the team is in one location, but he's never there? That just shows you he doesn't care. That just shows you he cares more about his own company, Shikshin, than he did of Fantom. So there's many other stories and details I can get into, but again, it could maybe for another time, because it could take up too long. Yeah.
Let me just ask you this in hindsight now. What's your emotional attitude to the whole situation? Do you feel angry? Do you feel vindicated or resolved? Or
I feel kind of vindicated, because of like, how successful Fantom has been since then. Even though we've had like a rocky past few months, in part because of some like, narratives around Fantom, and also a large part because of the market conditions. On the whole, like Fantom is like exponentially bigger than it was, back then a few years ago. It's, you measure it by the technology, you measure it by the number of users, you measure it by the applications. It's exponentially bigger. And I think we really turned it around. Like, as Andre would say, we kind of like unscammed it, right? Like, which is a bit unusual, right? Like, this doesn't happen. Like, people in 2018, 2019 were telling me consistently, why do you waste your time on this? Everyone knows that, it's over, give up and that sort of thing. And I didn't. I like persevered, and I turned out to be right. And other people persevered, like Andre and a few others on the team, despite all this negativity, and we were proven right so far, right? And in terms of like anger, like, yeah, like if I keep, I think I'm a little bit emotional in the corner. When I talk about the past and what happened, like it brings back memories, and it's very raw in my brain. Like obviously, like I'm still like a bit like angry about it, but I'm not angry on a daily basis anymore. I'm kind of a bit, I wouldn't say like over it, but I've kind of like, when I've thought about the past, I haven't really been thought about like, I hated this so much, right? It's more about like, what lessons can I learn, right? Because there were mistakes on my part, mistakes of being naive, mistakes of, I remember like questioning the technology, not really getting like the right or like good responses back, kind of like hand wavy responses about, technical questions about how the technology worked, how they did peer selection fast and all that sort of stuff, right? And, back then I was like, wow, I did look at the credentials, they're, PhDs, associate professors. Wow, maybe these people are just so much smarter than me, because my background isn't in, distributed computing. It's in, a different type of programming. It's got like virtual machine analysis. So these guys must just be like so much smarter than me, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. And so, I just trust them, because I just got my bachelor's and they've had much more academic experience than I have, right? And I realized that was a mistake. You never just trust people because of like their authority, right? Or what credentials they have, right? It's called, it's a logical fallacy. It's called the appeal to authority, right? You don't ever want to do that. You want to look at everything in terms of the logic and reasoning and arguments and, and the data and the facts behind it. That's a big lesson that I learned. So never trust someone just because of who they are, or about like whether what they say or not is correct. Just think about logically what they've been saying. And sometimes that can be difficult to do because you don't have complete information. There's an element of trust there, but you need to like really follow like logic and reasoning, and not just say like, whoa, this guy just must be so much smarter than me. Because in some cases, that may not actually be the case.
Yeah. Well, I feel anybody in your situation would have made the same decision. I mean, when you're working with people that have that kind of background, it's like, it's beyond your, I think it's, the vast majority of people would have done the same thing, which is to say that you by default trust smart people.
I think someone with more experience would have made different decisions to me. I was, I have a bit more experience now. I wouldn't say I'm super experienced and I know everything, but like I have a little bit more experience now compared to like a few years ago. But I think someone, who had like much more experience than me at the time, would have, they would have made different decisions, or like given different answers, and maybe things would have been like a bit different. Maybe they would have made what I believe is the right decision in the end a bit faster than like the decision that I made. But also like I wanted to change things very early on. Like the triggering point for me was when this plagiarism thing happened, right? Because that was to me, it's like a no-no, right? Like you're always told at universities, well, correctly, that if you plagiarize, and there's all these warnings, if you plagiarize, you can be expelled, right? And you'll never be welcome back, even just one case, right? And so to plagiarize for an ICO where you told people certain things about your technology that weren't true, and you presented and you claimed that you had like a test net and you didn't, and you raised $40 million, is I think even more serious than that, right? More serious than academic misconduct. It's like 100 times worse. And so that for me was a triggering point. And like, again, like honestly, maybe someone with more experience than me, like, by themselves would have decided to stay, but it was just by myself, I would have left. And so I really, have to give credit for Andre for keeping me around, because, had I just quit and, everyone just quit, I don't think Fantom would be where it is, because I think my biggest contribution was being the one that like really tried to push through like the right decision, which was to like reform the team. Everything else pales in comparison, in my opinion. Yeah. And I'm just saying this to talk on my book. I think that was like a critical turning point. And nowadays, I think the successful Fantom is not really due to me. It's due to people like Andre in the past, building up like our treasury reserves, especially in 2020. It's to do with the developers who have been building out, the technology in the ground, because I don't really do much development anymore. It's the people in the ecosystem that are building out the ecosystem. I still play a role, helping, try and bring projects for Fantom and doing, like general administration and CEO stuff. But I think, that's not really as important as like many other people in the community nowadays. I don't think I'm as useful as I used to be in the past.
Yeah. Well, it's only through the decisions you made at the time and the decisions other people made at the time that allowed you to be sitting here on this podcast running Fantom in the way that you are. And I mean, I think it's an act of almost hubris to label things as good and bad, because we don't know, right? Like, who knows how things play out and how things reshape our world. So all those experiences, man, that's like, you can't learn those things unless you live through them. You can hear heuristics and cliches. People can say idioms and that kind of stuff, but until you live it, you don't learn it.
I guess you can learn from other people's experiences, and I think it's very important to learn from other people's experiences. I've, watched people, just in my spare time, like watch stories on YouTube, or just like listen to like people's stories about, not necessarily to do with crypto, but just like how they live their lives, right? Because everyone's lived unique lives, and everybody's like had like their own unique experiences, and you only live once, right? And so you don't have the time in the world to live, gain the same personal experience as 10 other people, as 20 other people, or even like the same experience as like one other person, right? Because everyone's lived their own life and everybody has like lived it uniquely, right? And so I think it is important to like learn, stories and experiences from other people. Obviously, like, when you experience it yourself, it's more raw. There's a lot more emotion mixed into it. There's a lot more like feeling at the time. So that kind of is a difference. For me, like, I think what I've learned is, when you think about the past, like obviously, in hindsight, it's very, very easy to think about things and be like, okay, that obviously was wrong. That obviously was the right decision. That obviously was the wrong decision, and this is the best way to have done things, right? But you don't want to look at it that way. You just want to look at it in terms of like, okay, so if I'm presented in a similar situation going forward, how do I avoid the mistakes that I made in the past, and make the right ones? I mean, that's what's important. Reflect on the past. Don't reflect in terms of like, okay, I should have done this or shouldn't have done that. Reflect in the past and think about, what can I do better next time? If you're presented in a similar situation. I don't think personally myself, I'll be presented in the same unique situation that happened at Fantom, or at least I hope not. But if I'm presented with something similar, or similar things or warning signs that I see, I think I know how to find them better and how to look at the flags and kind of swim between the flags, use the swimming analogy, right? To stay safe and to also like warn other people as well. That's what I think is important.
Yeah, so true. So true. And it is very unlikely you'll be in the same situation. But I think to your point earlier, learning about what other people have suffered through, or the mistakes that they claim that they've made, helps make each individual person it builds out their mental model. I like that term, mental model, which is the set of beliefs that you hold about other people, yourself, the world, and helps shape your pathway through it. You can use that as effectively like guardrails or bumpers on a bowling lane. Like it provides a philosophy of life, really, for lack of a better word. And I mean, this is, it's like, I'm sure you learned a lot, but also the impact that you've had on other people. And also think about the impact that your experience, your story, everyone that hears your story, the benefit to other people's lives that you will never know about. It's like our society is as strong as we each are able to build out our mental models for determining what trust is, right? Like that has to be the biggest conversation in the world today is what mechanism should we use to determine trust? I mean, when we boil it down, like media and public health and government, it's like that's really a huge part of what we're asking ourselves today. Crypto certainly plays a role in that, I'm sure. Yeah. Blockchain plays a major role, but it goes beyond that as well.
Yeah, no, in terms of trust, as I mentioned before, whenever like people would like say stuff to you, you always have to think about, what's the motivation and intention of saying stuff to you, right? And this is why like I don't really trust politicians, because politicians' incentive are to tell you what they think you want to hear, right? Which usually, in democracies is more free stuff, right? We've got an election in Australia where both of the major parties, we're like in major debt. We've got an election coming up in 12 days, and every single day they're promising billions of dollars in more spending, on this, that, and the other, and they don't talk about like, okay, who will actually pay for it? Is it going to be like our children, because they can't vote? Is it going to be people who are unborn who don't even exist now? So.
I'm totally with you on what you're saying. Like, no, well, let me ask you one nuanced question about this. So, have you seen a politician get up there and say, "Okay, here's our budget. Here's how much debt we're in. Here's our relative growth projections." Do you see? I wonder how much is going on. That's like it's like a consensus. It's like consensus mechanism in people's minds where a politician is thinking in their head, I have to act like a politician. I have to do what other people do. They tend to just prioritize what people want and give away things. Is that it's just a culture of politics, or do you think that mechanism is actually tested? Like, are there people pushing back on that?
Well, what did Warren Buffett say? Like, if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the result, right? So the incentive is to win votes, right? So they don't care about people who can't vote right now or people who won't be able to vote for a while, right? Because they're worried about, the next election, not worried about election 20 years from now, because, they won't be around for 20 years longer. They'll be retired and enjoying their lives and government pensions, right? I have seen a few politicians talk about the truth. There's not many though. To name a few, Ron Paul, he was a big influence in my life. It's kind of how I came up with the political philosophy, or how I adopted the political philosophy of libertarianism, back in 2007 and 2008 because of his presidential campaign. I know a lot of people also as well, like that's when they first heard of Ron Paul. His son Rand Paul is pretty good. There's also Thomas Massey, a Republican in the US Congress. He's also told a lot about the truth, but there's not many politicians who do it, because again, what's the incentive? The incentive is to just like say to voters what you think they want to hear so they get elected, not necessarily what you believe is in the best interest. And that's the difference. And so just coming back to trust, in your personal lives, think about like how, not just what people say, but what they actually do. Do they perform actions that seem trustworthy, right? Do they say and do stuff? Do they actually do what they say, right? And is the story straight? Are they very easy to understand? Because in my opinion, and we've got a lot of these people in Fantom, fortunately. We've got like great developers and individuals who, I think are just fundamentally trustworthy, and they've always been that way. And when I think about like their attitudes and what they say to me and what they've done, the more straight it is, the more easy to understand it is, the better the sign, right? Because if somebody is very easy to understand about what the intentions is, I just want to, I'm working in Fantom. I want to do what's best in Fantom. Here's what I think we should do. Execute it. Okay, here's what I think we should do. Execute it. That's like easy to understand. Someone who's deceptive is someone that you always have doubts about. And you're like, oh, are they saying stuff to me because they're trying to trick me? Are they doing this 4D chess so they can get me to like say or do something, for their own personal benefit? Is somebody like actually doing something because, it's in the interest for themselves? Do they have a conflict of interest? For some people that you can't trust, you always have to be worried about those sorts of things, right? So the road is like very like windy and very like hard to figure out, right? But people who are just like honest and decent are just like, they're just like a straight road. They're just easy to understand. And so anyone who you think is like easy to understand is someone who's probably trustworthy. So, we've got developers on our team who, I've never caught them out in a lie. They've always tried the best. Sometimes, they might make mistakes in the coding or whatever, but they own up to it. And so, they're very, very trustworthy, and everything they say and what they do is consistent. And so I trust, these people completely, and that's the sort of people you need on your team. If you have people on your team that you have doubts about, you need to think about, whether they're the right people on your team.
So true. So true.
Does that make sense? It's about consistency. Yeah. If someone's story doesn't add up, there's something wrong,
Yeah. I once heard this piece of business advice that was like, most CEOs think about recruiting the top talent. That's where all their emphasis is, and making the top talent that they have on the team better, when in reality, a very under invested in part of company building is removing the worst performing talent. So if you think about it, out of a percentage of 100 people, there's roughly like 80% of people who are just good performers. They're going to do their job well, and they come in, they don't put in extra hours, but they're like solid workers. Then there's 10%, or more like 15%, who are the overachievers, people who really kick ass, and they end up building what like half of the team builds. And then there's the 5%. And the 5% are what you're referring to, which is they're politically motivated by their own gain over the company. And they are willing to throw other people under the bus, not make any progress, and then make it look like they're making progress. They're effectively dragging people down. And when that number gets big, then it starts to atrophy the rest of the team. The top players see that, they don't want to be a part of it, they leave, and then the rest of the team starts to leave as they see that happen. And then when you hit a certain critical number, like 20% of the team is like that, it just, the whole thing deteriorates and goes nowhere. So it's just as important it is to maximize the efficiency of the top performing people is to get rid of people who have that attitude. So thought I'd throw that in there as well.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's a Pareto principle. I mean, I think in general with the Pareto principle, it's the so-called like 80-20 rule, right? Which is like 20% of the people will do 80% of the work. And I think, in life in general, that's how it is. That's one reason why we have like inequality, which, it's debatable about whether that's like a good thing or a bad thing. I think it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you have like, you have inequality because some people are just a lot more efficient than others, right? Some people are better at just like managing resources and doing things more efficiently than other people. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to work. I think it's the same thing when it comes to just like getting stuff done. It's a Pareto principle. Yeah. And just your comment about hiring the top talent, I just to add to that, I think, that's only half of the equation. You do obviously want to hire the top talent, right? You want to hire the smartest people, the best people, the most productive people. But you also need to hire the people who are the most trustworthy, because you can hire someone who is like really smart, talented, very productive, but maybe not trustworthy. And if you hire someone who is not trustworthy, if you hire someone who's only half of the equation, it will be a disaster for your team. I've hired a couple of developers who appeared to be quite smart and talented, but they were not good team players. They were just not good characters. They didn't know how to work with other people. They had, issues with like ego and arrogance. And, the work that they turned out was only partially completed. And so we had to let them go. And so you want to hire people with good character, who are trustworthy and who are very talented. This is why, like, when I hire developers going forward, I talk to them and I can ask them technical questions because I have somewhat of a technical understanding. But I always defer it to the existing core development team about whether they want to hire this person or not. Because in the end, they're going to be working with this individual. If they don't think he's qualified enough or she's qualified enough, if they don't think that this person is a good person to be working with, who has the right character, then it's not going to work out, because I don't want to impose upon my existing developers any new developers that they don't want to work with. And so for me, our developers always have veto power over, the decision making, right? So if they don't want to hire a developer, I won't hire that person. If they want to hire a developer, I will hire that person. So I'm very, very receptive to that feedback, because they're the ones who can make the bus to make the best judgment. They're the ones who can hire the best developers. And they're the ones that have the best understanding, much more than I do. And so if you can defer, to people in your organization who are trustworthy and who have the right knowledge to make the right decisions, you should always do that. if someone can make a better decision with the organization than you can, you let them make the decision. And that can be hard to identify, but you want to be in that position. That's a good position to be in.
Yeah. I think that's a good piece of advice.
When you
think about the company, yeah, well, I think that's universally true. As much as you can do it, harder to get when you're much larger, but regardless, when you think about the what you have now on the table, you have the ecosystem, which is the developers building on the layer one, what you've built protocol. Then you have your in-house developers, right? The people employed by the foundation.
Yeah.
Is the trajectory of the foundation down? Like as the community and ecosystem continue to grow, will the end state of the foundation, I mean, are you trying to decrease it or minimize the budget there? Or is there a pool of money coming from the token, like a percentage of the token gets sold back to the foundation, or some mechanism for sustaining the foundation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the kind of the parallel I like to draw, like I did at the beginning of the conversation, is really between like Fantom Foundation, Ethereum Foundation, Fantom Ecosystem, Ethereum Ecosystem. So as the Ethereum ecosystem gets bigger, I want the foundation's influence to be progressively less of an influence, right? To the point, ideally, where the Fantom ecosystem runs by itself. But I think in the end, there will always still be a foundation, just like there's the Ethereum Foundation. But the influence of the foundation will decrease over time. And, we're going to see that already. So obviously, like a couple of years ago when the chain first launched, or 2.5 years ago, there wasn't really an ecosystem. It was just the foundation, right? So everything was like pretty much foundation driven. But nowadays, a lot of things are not foundation driven. They're ecosystem driven. They're driven by, developers and users. And so the Fantom Foundation obviously still has an influence. Like, people know who we are. We have resources, we have developers. But that's like less important than it was in the past. That being said, as I mentioned before, our aim is to keep growing the ecosystem. So, we want to, keep growing it over time, but progressively, we'll be like, I envision that we'll be less involved in business development. We'll be less involved in growing the ecosystem. We'll be more involved in just purely focusing on the technology. And so in the long run, if the foundation can just really end up focusing on the technology, over the several years, and the ecosystem just kind of grows by itself, like what's happened with the Ethereum Foundation and the Ethereum ecosystem, where the Ethereum Foundation is really focusing, more on education, more on technology, more on giving grants to providers rather than, business development, or, encouraging projects like directly to deploy on Ethereum. If we can be in the same situation for the Fantom Foundation, then I think we've achieved our aim, and I think we've been successful.
Yeah, certainly the Ethereum project has been an inspiration for you, and I'm sure your partners, as you design everything. How do you see the places where you've marked your territory? Like, in what ways, if you talk to developers who are building on Fantom, in what ways do you feel that you've really distinguished yourself, either culturally or technically, to attract people?
Yeah. So technically speaking first, I mean, one of the key differences between Fantom and other technologies is that, one, we have a technology where you can process multiple transactions simultaneously and achieve like finality, right? So, not have probabilistic finality, not have finality, in the longest chain rule, which is a security issue, but they have finality. That's what we call deterministic after one block, right? And to be able to do all of that in a fast manner, and in a manner where the network doesn't go offline, even when there's a lot of activity on the network. Like, for example, like more recently when there were like liquidations taking place, the Fantom protocol or Fantom ecosystem never went offline. It worked exactly as intended, and so I think that's a unique selling point for us. The fact that the Fantom chain never goes offline. It's extremely reliable and robust. It has multiple layers of fault tolerance. So a developer that builds on Fantom can be assured of that. And a developer that builds on Fantom can also be assured that there are like many other improvements coming down the line, which will decrease transaction costs and increase network throughput. So for example, we just released a major upgrade today called SnapSync. And SnapSync allows you to synchronize nodes very fast between one another. So to launch a node on Fantom and to keep it up with the main chain is a fraction of the time as it was in the past. And you can do all of that with far less resources than was required in the past. And this will allow us to basically increase the network throughput. And we've got like other fixes down the line, improving the smart contract execution engine, improving the amount of data that gets processed by nodes. So all of these changes are coming down the pipeline. It is our number one priority. And so developers know that can be assured that the technology will get better over time. So that's the technology point. On the cultural part, the Fantom ecosystem has grown organically. We haven't gone around and said to people, oh, we'll give you like $1 million to deploy in Fantom, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, and had to convince people one at a time. The growth for the Fantom ecosystem has been completely unique. So the people who are on the Fantom ecosystem are there because they're loyal, because they love it, they love the community, they love talking to people, they just like love being there, and they love the applications that are on there. So I feel like we have quite sticky users. I mean, most users, like on the whole, use multiple blockchains, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that trend will continue into the future, but a lot of people who are on Fantom, who use multiple blockchains, do love Fantom a lot. And so if you deploy on Fantom, you get access to all of these users who are already there, these hundreds of thousands of users, and the foundation can actively help you like attract those users, by doing marketing, by helping you with integration work, by helping you, possibly with financing and investment as well. And so, this is something that we've offered like a lot of other projects, and we have a lot of robust infrastructure developed, a lot of like API nodes, a lot of different services that people can rely on, and we've also got a couple of interesting other services in the pipeline right now that will make contracts much more secure and safe, and continuous auditing done for projects on chain that are not unique technologies and are not really available on other chains, which is coming down a bit down the line. So there's a number of reasons why I think people should develop on Fantom, obviously, and I'm biased, of course.
Good, as you should be. What percent? If you had to just throw a number out there,
I'm biased.
That's funny. On that note, do you feel like there's an inspiring competitive element to Ethereum and Near or some of the other layer one chains out there? I mean, not in any malicious way. It's not like you're going to fight each other, but in a competitive, like healthy sense, does that attitude persist?
Yeah.
Where you're like, you're inspired to compete and build something better?
So I think you broke up there, but I think your question was about like, is it like a competitive spirit, right? Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there definitely is, and I think that's a very positive thing. Like with like with many like businesses and things in life, right? Like competition helps bring out the best in like technology, right? It helps bring out the best result, and I think like all markets are competitive, right? Including the cryptocurrency, the blockchain market that we're in. So I think the competition between the L1s is first and foremost about technology. Who can get most scalable as quickly as possible? Who can develop the best technology, which is the most efficient, which allows you to get the most users, and basically optimizes for the user experience in the three ways that I mentioned before. Fast transactions, cheap transactions, and secure transactions. And so for Fantom, like we've taken a bit of a different approach to the technology problems that we've identified than the other chains out there. So other chains are focusing on like core development around like around like subnets and other such ideas, which may or may not work in the end, layer 2 technologies. But with Fantom, we're much more focused on. We've noticed that our consensus is very, very fast, but the other like technologies related to the consensus in terms of transaction processing are actually quite slow. So that's what we're working on, as well as replacing the smart contract execution engine that we inherited from Ethereum with our own execution engine. Because no matter like how scalable you make the core technology, if you've still got limitations and you want to be a smart contract engine or a smart contract platform like Fantom, if you're limited by the EVM, then that's still like a bit bottleneck. So that's something that we're tackling, that I noticed a lot of other projects have actually discussed and appear, at least publicly from what I can see, appear to know what the problems are, but are focused on other scalability solutions. So I think these other layer ones are tackling, we're all tackling the same problem, scalability, but I think we're tackling it in different ways. And I think that's healthy because in the end, it encourages us to compete, it encourages us to create the best technology, and in the end, we'll get much more scalable technology, which will allow us to get that hyperbolic growth to be as big as the internet. Because I think in the long run, blockchain technology will be as ubiquitous as the internet. just like the early days of the internet, if you watch videos from like 1991, 2 and 3, people were talking about what is internet, what are browsers, all of this stuff is weird. I feel like people talk about crypto in the same way. Wow, what is MetaMask? What are wallets? This is all weird, right? But people eventually learn over time and they get used to it. And then they just like have network effects, right? They just tell the friends become more educated and they can use the technology. But we need to increase the scalability of the technology to get to that level. But I think it will happen in the end. And so that's why on the whole, I'm very optimistic about blockchain technology. I think it will be a big part of our future going forward. It may take, another 5 or 10 years before we get much more adoption than we already have, but I think it will happen in the end.
Yeah. I mean, it's just really a download speed problem of how long does it take the tools and products that are built out there for to download in people's brains. It's like you have to explain what these things are. People have to understand it and use it, and then build on top of that. Man, we cruised through this hour. We've been chatting for, just about 60 minutes now. Michael, are you avid writer on any blogs, or are you personally on any Twitter or social media that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really do like much writing these days, but I am available on Twitter. It's at Michael F. Kong, so Kong. And then, of course, please follow us at Fantom FDN. So at Fantom FDN is our official Fantom Foundation account. That's where a lot of details are released on, pretty much I think every few hours we have some sort of tweet or retweet that goes out there about new technology, like our new release today, about other projects that are launching with Fantom, about upcoming AMAs that you can participate in, or interviews that are happening, or events. So if you follow us on Twitter and myself on Twitter, you'll see a lot of that content.
Awesome. Really enjoy chatting with you, man. Congrats on all the progress so far. Fantom's an awesome project, and I mean, it's an awesome name. It connotates I think of Phantom of the Opera, but it's like Fantom is like a dark horse almost. So keep crushing, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
I appreciate
much.
You coming on today, Michael.
I really appreciate it as well. If I could just make one final comment, I know right now, the sentiment isn't very good. Not just with regards to Fantom, but with regards to crypto as a whole. But I want to assure people, Fantom went through a bear market in 2018, 2019, and we just put our heads down and we worked to get to the position where we're in now. If we are in a bear market right now, and there's a lot of indications that maybe we are because of macroeconomic factors, etc. Be rest assured the foundation is still here. We're in a much better position than we were a couple of years ago, and so we're just going to keep building and keep releasing stuff. And so we're in it for the long run, and we're in a much stronger position. Yeah,
I love it. Very straightforward and matter of fact.
And so is the ecosystem too. Yeah,
high trustworthy. All right, dude. Keep doing your thing. Great talking with you.
All right, thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much again for the time. Yeah.